Existence. It seems simple, right? After all, we're here, breathing, thinking, and living our lives. But is it really that simple? Have you ever stopped to wonder if you really exist? This question has puzzled many minds, from ancient philosophers to modern thinkers. René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But is thinking alone enough to guarantee our existence? Once, I found myself looking at the sky and wondering if what that image made me feel would be the same for someone else. For me, it might be a sense of tranquility, while for another, it could be a reminder of something sad. It's like colors. You're sure that colors exist, right? Red, blue, green. It all seems as clear as day. But in reality, these are just interpretations by your brain of certain electromagnetic waves. A real bug in the matrix. For instance, infrared light is invisible to us, but some snakes see it as a kind of color. Reality, then, is more relative than it seems, highly dependent on who is observing. And this is where the ego comes into play. The ego is like a tinted lens through which we view the world, shaping our perception of everything around us. But is the I really real, or is it just a construct of our mind? David Hume, for example, argued that we are nothing more than a collection of perceptions and thoughts. It's as if each person has their own filter on reality, seeing the world in a unique and subjective way. It's like we're all living in a personalized virtual reality, where our own brain is the programmer. Things get even more complex when we consider the very idea of reality. Is the world around us truly as we perceive it? Or are we just interpreting everything through our senses, which can fail or be deceived? It's as if reality were a grand stage play, where the scenery and actors change depending on who's watching, and we, in the end, are both the spectators and the actors in this play, trying to understand the plot. If even the color we see can be questioned, imagine how our perception of ourselves can be distorted by our own ego. If there's one thing that shapes our view of the world, it's the ego. I'm not talking about the kind of ego that makes us think we're the best at everything, but the philosophical concept that refers to our self-awareness. John Locke, for instance, believed that personal identity is defined by the continuity of consciousness. But what does that really mean? Imagine the ego as a pair of glasses we wear to see the world. It not only filters what we see, but also adds its own nuances and distortions. Once, I was talking to a friend about a movie, and to me, it was a thrilling masterpiece. To him, it was a total waste of time. How is that possible? Think about how different people can have totally different reactions to the same event. One person might see a rainy day as something melancholy and sad, while another might find it comforting and relaxing. It all depends on the lenses we're wearing, our ego. What's curious is that the ego not only influences how we see the world, but also how we interpret our own existence. Many philosophers, like Nietzsche, question the extent to which the I we perceive is genuinely authentic or just a social construct. Nietzsche talked about the concept of eternal recurrence, where our actions and choices repeatedly shape who we are. Thus, our ego can be seen as a kind of mask we wear, shaped by experiences, memories, and even society. This leads us to question, what if everything we think we know about ourselves is just a story we tell ourselves to feel better? Another interesting example is how different cultures perceive reality. For some isolated indigenous tribes, like the Sentinelese, the existence of TV shows makes no sense at all. For them, this reality simply doesn't exist. This shows that the ego and consciousness are deeply influenced by the cultural and social context we are in. What is real and meaningful to some may be completely irrelevant to others. And so, the ego guides us through life, being both a compass and a blindfold. It helps us navigate the world, but also limits what we are capable of perceiving. It's like we're trapped in a bubble of perceptions and beliefs, where the world is filtered through our own prejudices and experiences. And then we come back to the initial question, how can we be sure that our perception is the true reality? Perhaps we can't. Perhaps the ego is just a tool we use to make sense of a chaotic and incomprehensible universe. Reality is something we all experience, but what exactly is it? When we talk about reality, we might think of something concrete and unchangeable, but the truth is that it can be much more subjective than we imagine. Our perception of the world is actually a mental construct, filtered through our senses and interpreted by our brain. It's like being the director of a movie, where our brain decides which scenes make it into the final cut. To illustrate this, think about colors. As mentioned earlier, what we call colors are just different wavelengths of light that our eyes capture and our brain interprets. The interesting thing is that not all living beings perceive these waves in the same way. Some animals, like dogs, don't see colors the way we do. Meanwhile, some birds and insects can see ultraviolet, something completely invisible to us. This raises an intriguing question. What is real about the color red, for example, if different beings perceive it in such distinct ways? Moreover, our perception is shaped not only by our senses, but also by our experiences and culture. The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget observed that our understanding of the world develops as we grow and interact with it. Young children, for example, have a very different view of reality compared to adults, as they are still building their understanding of the world around them. And what about social media? They are a modern example of how we construct and reconstruct reality. On these platforms, we edit, filter, and even fabricate our experiences to make them seem more interesting or desirable. This reflects how our reality is a mental construct, where even the most trivial events can be turned into visual spectacles. This mental construction of reality is also reflected in how we interpret what we see. Consider René Magritte's famous painting, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. The image is of a pipe, but Magritte reminds us that it is just a representation, not the real object. This exemplifies how our minds can confuse representation with reality. Even if we can see a pipe, what we are actually seeing is an image created and interpreted by our brain. Ultimately, our reality is shaped by a complex interplay of our senses, mind, and experiences. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. Our beliefs, culture, and emotions deeply influence how we perceive everything around us. This leads to an intriguing philosophical question. If reality is a mental construct, to what extent can we trust what we see and experience? And more importantly, how does this perception shape who we are? Consciousness is one of the most mysterious and fascinating phenomena we can experience. It gives us a sense of identity, of being someone distinct in the world. But what exactly is consciousness? And more importantly, what does it tell us about who we really are? To begin with, consciousness can be understood as the capacity to perceive and reflect on our own existence and thoughts. Since ancient times, philosophers have debated what it means to be conscious. David Hume, for example, argued that there is no permanent self. We are just a collection of perceptions that constantly change. This means that the idea of a fixed self may be an illusion, a narrative we create to make sense of our experience. This view can be unsettling, but also liberating. If the self is just a construct, it means it can change and adapt. This explains why we sometimes feel that we've changed over time. Our tastes, opinions, and even our personality can evolve. We are like a river, always in motion, never exactly the same from one moment to the next. Who hasn't looked at an old photo and thought, who was that person? And why did they think that neon shirt was a good idea? The illusion of the self is also tied to how we perceive and remember events. Our memories are fundamental to our identity, but they are not faithful records of the past. In fact, they are more like stories we tell ourselves. Each time we remember something, we may change details or even create new elements. This means that the self we remember being is in part a creation of our mind, an interpretation of events and experiences. So, what does this tell us about the reality of consciousness? If our perception of who we are is so malleable and influenced by internal and external factors, how can we define the self? Consciousness seems to be an evolutionary tool that helps us navigate the world, make decisions, and interact with others. But, like other tools, it is not perfect. It is subject to errors, illusions, and misconceptions. In the end, the idea of a solid and constant self may be just a convenient construct, something that helps us cope with the complexity of life. This construct is useful because it gives us a sense of continuity and cohesion. However, it's important to remember that the self is part of a larger, more complex whole, which is our mind and our life experience. And perhaps, by recognizing the illusion of the self, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Self-awareness is the ability to perceive and reflect on our own thoughts and emotions. It's like having a constant internal conversation about who we are, what we feel, and how we react to the world around us. This introspective ability is what sets us apart from many other living beings, but it can also be a source of great complexity and dilemma. One of the significant dilemmas of self-awareness is the duality between the self we feel we are and the self we present to the world. Often, these two facets are not completely aligned. For example, you might feel insecure on the inside, but present yourself as confident to others. This discrepancy between our internal self and the external image we project can create conflicts and uncertainties about our true identity. Moreover, self-awareness leads us to question not only who we are, but also who we want to be. We constantly compare our actions and thoughts with our expectations and ideals. This comparison can lead to feelings of inadequacy or frustration when we realize we're not living up to the standards we've set for ourselves. This is especially true in the age of social media, where we are continuously exposed to idealized versions of others' lives. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist philosopher, argued that we are condemned to be free, meaning we are responsible for our choices and cannot escape this responsibility. Self-awareness, therefore, constantly confronts us with moral dilemmas, where we must choose between what is easy and what is right. It's like when you promise not to eat sweets, and 5 minutes later, find yourself devouring a chocolate cake. Freedom of choice, or a sweet illusion. Self-awareness also exposes us to the impermanence and mutability of the self. We may notice that our tastes, beliefs, and even our principles change over time. This can be unsettling because it challenges the idea of a fixed and stable identity. However, it can also be liberating, as it allows us to grow and adapt to new circumstances and challenges. In the end, self-awareness is a double-edged sword. It gives us the ability for introspection and personal growth, but also exposes us to dilemmas and uncertainties. It's a continuous process of self-exploration, where we are always seeking to better understand who we are and how we fit into the world. Perhaps by accepting this dual nature of self-awareness, we can find a balance between who we are and who we want to be, living more authentically and consciously. It's fascinating to realize that despite all the certainties we have, much of what we believe to be real is actually an interpretation by our mind. Descartes' famous maxim, "I think, therefore I am," reminds us that the only certainty we have is our ability to think and perceive. But even this perception is subject to questioning, as we have seen with the arguments of philosophers like Hume and Sartre, who challenged the solidity of the self and reminded us of our responsibility to define our own meaning. Self-awareness places us before profound dilemmas about who we are and how we should live. It forces us to face our flaws, the inconsistency of our values, and the impermanence of our identity. However, it is also a powerful tool for personal growth, allowing us to question, evolve, and seek a more authentic life. In the end, there may not be a definitive answer to the question of existence. Reality may indeed be a mental construct, and the self a convenient illusion. But this doesn't diminish the value of our experience. On the contrary, it gives us the freedom to create our own meaning, define what is important, and live according to our values. The final reflection is that the search for understanding our existence is as old as humanity and will continue to be an inexhaustible source of fascination and discovery. And even if we never find all the answers, the journey itself is what truly matters. After all, it is through this search that we connect with the world and ourselves. Remember, knowledge is the path to true freedom. Count on me and follow the white rabbit.